I started a business around sort of buying and selling broken electronics. So you'll get a phone with a broken screen story, you could probably get for like less than $100. And then you fix it up for $50 of parts and, 2 hours of your time. And suddenly you're able to resell it for like $600. People just didn't want our product, and people would outright pay us not to use our product. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they will grab us dinner on the house, grab us, whatever, just so that we would leave happy and not reach out to them again. I think there's early signs of product market fit that will validate whether or not you should continue to build a business. When Al and I were working at his parents' front desk, we would probably get 150 to 200 calls a day. I think within like the first week, we were ready to quit. So Rondah is an AI receptionist that answers the phones, schedules appointments, reschedules appointments, deals with patient questions, and then triages calls to the right person if someone else needs to take over. When you've got hundreds of dental clinics that rely on you to answer their phones every single day, when you've got patients that rely on you to schedule appointments so that they get their dental care met, it's a lot of responsibility, right? And I did not realize how much of an impact that would have on, my own ability to manage my life. The more important question is, what are you doing to make sure that you don't let down your employees who are relying on you to put food on the table? That, you ensure the most uptime for your customers and your patients that are relying on you for their business and their livelihoods, ensuring that this responsibility is being met at all times. I think that's the more important thing.
I think right now would be a perfect time to share that this podcast is officially sponsored. And this week's episode is brought to you by Juliana Barbati Consulting. Juliana is an expert in podcast SEO. She's worked with so many different podcasts and helped shows grow, helped shows get more eyes, helped shows get more ears, helped shows, get more followers. And I am honored to be working with her and have her team backing the podcast. So I'm very excited that they are the first advertiser to join the Round 2 podcast, first of many. So thank you, Juliana. And if you are looking for any sort of services to help your podcast grow, feel free to reach out to her. Her contact information is in the show notes. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Round 2 podcast. I am your host, Nikki Corbett, and I am here today with another one of my Techstars friends, Burhan Syed. Welcome to the Round 2 podcast.
Thank you for having me. Am I the first company you're, doing a podcast with that you've actually invested in?
I would say yes, you are.
Yeah.
Very excited about that. Very excited to be a part of the Rondah AI journey. So I am looking forward to learning more about you and letting folks hear your story and how everything came to be. So I know you were originally from Canada, but tell me a little bit more about your, early years growing up. Where exactly did you grow up?
I actually didn't grow up in Canada. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I was born in India.
Okay.
Because my mom's from there. We moved to Saudi Arabia when I was like 2 or 3 years old. Grew up there. Spent 11 years in Saudi and then moved to Canada when I was 11 years old. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. See, this is my favorite part about podcasting is that I don't know people's stories. I just know their nows. So that's exciting. So do you still have family in India or Saudi and go back to either of those places?
Not so much in Saudi, but yeah, India. I used to go back like every year, but now it's more sporadic with the startup.
Sure. Which part?
So South India, which is like
Okay.
Bangalore. It's in a state called Karnataka.
Okay. So I've only been to the northern part of India, but I have the south on my radar because I've heard there's some beautiful beaches and just like this, all the cities are so different. I mean, even the places that I've been, I did a tour and I think we went to like 5 or 6 different places and every single one was so different. So definitely we'll get there sometime.
I assume you went to like North India, right?
Yeah, it was like we started in Delhi and then kind of went down to Jaipur, Jodhpur, a couple of smaller towns that I can't remember the names, and Udaipur, beautiful.
Yeah.
We were right on I think it was a lake, and then ended up in Agra and got to see the Taj Mahal at sunset, which is still one of the most like beautiful memories I've ever had.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. Like We were supposed to go at sunrise and we ended up going at sunset because of whatever reason, I don't know. But it was so, so cool. And I'm so grateful to be able to witness that.
Yeah, no, I actually haven't been to the Taj Mahal, hilariously enough, so I gotta go.
Yes, you do need to go. It's really, really neat to like learn the history of it. I personally did not go inside because mainly just because I was so enamored with the outside and I love exterior architecture. And also the sun was setting and I didn't want to miss it. I didn't want to be like waiting in line to and miss the beauty that was behind it all. So it was really cool. You got to go.
Yeah, no, I definitely will.
All right. So you had like your teenage and post high school years in Canada.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you do as a kid that made you curious about entrepreneurship?
I mean, I just love playing with electronics, right?
Okay.
Grew up sort of taking apart computers and like being super interested in that, like, very basic programming stuff.
Uh-huh.
Because when you're like 13, you're like, what am I going to do over the summers kind of thing. But I think like first foray into entrepreneurship was probably when I was 13 years old. I started a business around sort of buying and selling broken electronics. Because at the end of the day, like these are super devalued because people just assume because the screen's broken, like a phone's now worth nothing, right? So you'll get a phone, like a broken iPhone back then, with a broken screen, sorry, you could probably get for like less than $100. And then you fix it up for $50 of parts and 2 hours of your time, and suddenly you're able to resell it for like $600. So that was the name of the game for me.
Okay. So what kind of profits were you turning, making broken things new again?
Hilariously enough, I had to look into this because part of like I guess the pitch for our fundraise was like serial entrepreneurship and sort of the younger years of like, becoming an entrepreneur. And so I went back and took a look at some of the old P&L sheets that I had on Excel. I
Uh-huh.
think the first year we did like 15K in profit, which is not bad
Oh my God, that's
at
amazing. And for a
13.
13
Yeah.
years old? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just said we, so did you have a business partner?
Yes. So I enlisted the help of my older cousin. So he actually didn't do anything.
Uh-huh.
It's just in Canada, you have this thing called Kijiji, which is like a Craigslist,
Oh,
de facto
okay.
like Craigslist version,
Sure.
where you can just buy and sell stuff online. And they have an age limit there where you can't be under, I think, 18, right, and sell. So for me to be able to sell without like going against those rules, we ended up getting my cousin to be like the front man. So he'd be the one engaging with people on Kijiji,
Okay.
and pretending to be me. And
Yeah.
I'd be the one actually buying their electronics, fixing it, and then reselling it. And he would
Oh
just
my
be doing
gosh.
the in-person stuff, right? So that way
Yeah.
we're going by the rules.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. So at 13 years old, you figured out a way to start making money for yourself.
Hmm.
And that's amazing. So this is one of my favorite things because like entrepreneurs, I feel like can be made, but a lot of them are born. So does entrepreneurship run in your family?
Yeah, I think mom's side businesses, right? My dad's side's more military. My
Okay.
mom's side for sure. I think almost every generation has been an entrepreneur.
Oh, well, that's cool. So you definitely have
Yeah.
it running through your veins. So what'd you do after your electronics business?
High school?
Yeah.
Not so much. I just read books.
Okay.
Super sort of bookworm, like spent all my time in the library studying and reading books. And then, yeah, got to university. And that's kind of when I started getting into the promotions game.
Hmm.
Primarily because we used to just go out, and a lot of these club owners would just see that I was out with a lot of big spenders, and they'd be like, "Hey,
Hmm.
man, you never spend a dime here, but you're always out with people that are spending thousands.
Uh-huh.
So why don't we just pay you to do this for us? Where you just bring out big spenders, and we'll give you commission on like 10, 15% on the table." Which at the time is like when you're in university and you've got like $6,000 in tuition to pay, you're like, hell yeah, I can make $500 a night. Awesome.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so how did you find yourself surrounded by all these people that were going to these clubs and balling out?
I was fortuitous to go to like a university that generally had a bigger nightlife than I guess most of other university towns in Canada. And then on
Okay.
top of that, it's generally like wealthier populations, so you've got a lot of like old wealth there.
Hmm.
So a lot of these kids are just coming in with a lot of money given to them by their parents. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Perfect. Hey, that's great. I mean, to be able to surround yourself with those types of people and then be able to turn it into an opportunity to make money. Now, did you tell these people that you were making money by bringing them into the business or bringing them into
Oh
the
yeah, of
clubs?
course. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. They know, right? At that
Uh-huh.
point, you just become their sort of go-to contact to go out.
Yeah.
And then if they like spending time with you and you guys are friends, it's even better.
Yeah, totally. Because you're basically getting to like party for free, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't drink, so
Yeah.
uh,
Well, so I guess you are like a good person, and then you're like, at least they have someone like a good contact that's like trustworthy and sober.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm the designated driver.
There you go. There you go. Well, cool. So, what made you decide to continue on that path? Because I know your original company was nightclub focused or nightlife focused.
I guess I can walk you through sort of why we got into that sort of platform before we got into the new one. Realistically, if you break it down, the nightlife is pretty dated in terms of like the tech they use.
Mhm.
Probably it's been the same thing for the last 20, 30 years since
Oh, shit.
SMS and like phone calls were created. Generally speaking, when you have a client that wants to go out, there's some sort of promoter or service staff that, reaches out to that person and gets that scheduled, but that's usually just through SMS and phone calls. And then they end up just texting the manager of the club or the owner of the club the actual details for the reservation, and then someone else goes in and manually inputs that into a PM or a POS system, right? I mean, that's pretty much how they did things back in the 50s as well. So nothing's really changed. And from the promoters like angle, you're not really being held to any targets because there's no targets being measured, right? Like, how do you measure things if everything's being done through SMS and phone calls? But the thing is, they're generating high target sales, right? Because at the end of the day, anyone spending between 1 and 10K on a table. For a SaaS platform, some SaaS platforms charge 10K for an entire year. And these employees that are selling these SaaS platforms, they're being held to like a pretty high standard in terms of commission and targets, all that kind of stuff. The idea behind this was let's hold promoters to these high standards as well because they're selling valuable items. Let's find a way to get club goers an easier pathway instead of having to call a bunch of promoters or email or call the club. Just have a platform kind of like Open Table where they can reserve these tables, and at the same time, let's give the club the ability to track all these things and have like oversight on all operations. So that was kind of like the idea behind it. I think it's a good idea. I don't think we executed properly on it. If I could go back and redo it, I'd probably change the way we solve the marketplace problem because it really is a marketplace problem, right? You've got three different people that you have to sell to and get buy-in from to make this work. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The promoter needs to be able to use it for all their clients to even bring people onto the platform. The club goers need to be willing to use it to book their nights out. That's the easiest person to sell to because the incentive for them is simple, right? They get an easy way of having a night out. And then the clubs themselves need to have buy-in so that you can actually orchestrate all these things with their oversight and with the integrations onto their tech stack. Because otherwise, it doesn't work. I think that was the biggest issue. If I could go back and do it again, we'd probably become a platform that empowers anyone to become a promoter. Because if you think about
Oh,
it this
uh-huh.
way, everything a promoter does is literally revolves around their social circle, right? They create a social circle, they bring people out, they get commission on sales that their friends are making. And so if you could pretty much empower, let's say you and I are friends, I use the platform to become a promoter, which is like I enlist as a promoter on the platform. Now the owner of the platform, so let's say it's someone else, they go and get a contract from the club where they've already got the sales targets set, they've got the commission structure set, and they get the money straight from the club. Then that person could pretty much pay me out of that sort of commission structure, right? So let's say I bring you out, you pay, $5,000 for a table. The platform makes $500 in commission, and they pay me out $100 for my time. So that, in my opinion, solves the marketplace problem because now everyone's got an incentive structure to become a part of it. Because the biggest issue is promoters weren't using the platform as they
Okay.
needed to.
Got it. I know it's so crazy to me how expensive, like, I mean, what are the margins just must be absolutely insane. There's a girl on TikTok who has like insane generational family wealth, and she will go and she will share her like monthly expenses at the end of every month. And I saw her video for February and she was like, oh, yeah, we spent $89,000 at the clubs. And I'm just like, what are you guys doing? Like, that's insane to me.
Yeah, it's a horrible industry to be a part of. Going back, I probably wouldn't have even gotten myself involved in the industry, to be honest.
Yeah.
Although I think it's a very valuable skill to learn to be able to like promote, street promote, like have the ability to go talk to anybody and convince them to come out is a valuable skill, I think, as a salesperson.
Yeah.
So I always tell like anyone who reaches out to me for sales advice, like the best way to learn to be a salesperson is probably just to be a promoter.
That's an interesting. I've never heard anybody say that before, but I also have never spoke to anybody who's had such an extensive experience in nightlife. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I know how you ended up getting there, but you had a business partner, business partners through all of this. So how did you guys originally meet and decide that you wanted to be in business together?
I don't think we decided necessarily. There was not a certain conversation that I can pinpoint to where we were all like, hey, we should build a business together. I think it just happened gradually. Muhammad and I, so my CTO, we've known each other since we were like 10 years old. Our parents are friends. We went to the same middle school, high school. So I've seen his growth as a human throughout all that period of time. And he's just been honestly one of the brightest, most brilliant, intelligent people I've worked with, right?
What
So
a compliment.
yeah, I mean, honestly, you've met him, so like
Yeah, yeah.
So at the end of the day, like when it came down to who would I pick to be my CTO, it was kind of no question. I wanted him, and I honestly probably wouldn't have started a startup if he wouldn't join me on the journey. And then for Alan, him and I have been best friends since first year of university. We were randomly assigned college roommates, and Alan kind of we just fell into it because he's just the hardest working person I know. And then when it came time for us to sort of get a third co-founder that could come in with a sort of different angle and at the same time be able to add value on the stuff that we couldn't, it was kind of a no-brainer to add him to the team.
That's so cool. That's always fun. Were you just like out chit-chatting and like you said started talking about different things, or you just were through just like living together and them watching your career and you guys started talking about how you could make more money, or like how did
No,
that
this is
even
in
evolve?
university.
Yeah.
So we fell into a very interesting time because half of our university career was pre-COVID and the other half was post-COVID. So in the middle of university, when you have nothing to do and COVID just hit and you can't go out anywhere, for us, we just kind of got together as a group of friends and decided, hey, like maybe we should, build a business together while, we have all this time on our hands. That's kind of what happened. Alan actually wasn't even a part of the team back then. It was just me and Mohammed. And so we started thinking about building Alibi, and then things happened. Schools, got more difficult and tougher. And so we decided to, place the idea on pause, go back, finish school. And then we got back to it right after we graduated university. But then that was a year before we started Techstars.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So then Alan came on board as you started picking it back up and getting ready for Techstars.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Okay. So that's where we met. So like that, now we're at the point where we met in the Techstars program. And it's funny because as we were going through that program, as I've told you before, like, and as I've told on this podcast before, like my experience there was definitely different because I was brought on as a consultant. I wasn't a co-founder. And I joined up with the team I was with like 4 days before Techstars actually started. So from my perspective, it was just such a different than any of yours because, you guys have all been like breathing blood, sweat, tears into your businesses. And they're like, your babies that you brought to this program to try to like go through everything and figure out like, did you really have something? And as I was going through all of that, one of the things that I remember so vividly on our very first day of in-person, I remember Neil saying, some of you guys will leave here doing something completely different than when you started. And I remember thinking that was so interesting because I just did. And it really, really stuck with me. And so then fast forward to the end, and you guys were one of the ones walking out doing something completely different than when you started. And I was like, God, that was so cool. And it was like such a testament to the program and to what they teach in that program. And so you guys really figured out along the way that what you were doing wasn't going to be something that would hit. And so at what moment was it that you guys decided to pivot, and how did you make such a like crazy 180?
I think everyone at the Techstars program thinks that we kind of just like woke up one day and decided to execute Alibi and start a new business. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that because I think there's early signs of product market fit that will validate whether or not you should continue to build a business. But the thing is, when you're a first-time founder, you're not really keeping your eye out for those signs, right? What you're really doing is executing on this idea that you believe so much in. And I think a lot of the traps that first-time founders fall into is like being so in love with the idea that they forget to even think about whether or not people care. And so, throughout building Alibi, we had signs of the opposite of product market fit, where like people just didn't want our product and people would outright pay us not to use our product. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There've literally been nights where we've pitched nightclub owners and they will grab us dinner on the house, grab us, whatever, just so that we would leave happy and not reach out to them again. So, I mean, when you're looking at those signs, you should know to either pivot the way you're approaching executing the idea, or question whether or not the problem you're trying to solve even exists. And I think that's where we went wrong. I think the problem we were trying to solve exists, but in a different way. I think what it is a problem more so related to club goers than it was for promoters and clubs. And so we just didn't take that angle, and we were solving it wrong. And I touched on what I would have done differently, but also like sort of shifting away from the club stuff and into, I guess, the idea that we pivoted into. Throughout university, when after I'd met Alan, we actually worked at his parents' clinics
Oh,
over the
you
summers.
did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
what did
him
you
and
do
I,
there?
we were receptionists.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Okay, I did not know this. This makes it even
Yeah.
more interesting. Okay. Awesome.
We had actually identified that problem too, and we'd been thinking about it for so long. So it's not one of those things where you just wake up the next morning, you're like, I want to solve a problem in dental, right? It was more
Got
so
it.
that like, hey, we know this other problem exists. We've just chosen to solve this a different problem at the moment. And we'd always joked about, we should start a dental business because we'd do such a better job at it. Because after, doing a year of trying to sell nightclubs and not having them buy anything, you start to question yourself. I mean, the problem that we saw in dental was very clear. When Al and I were working at his parents' front desk, we would, I shit you not, probably get 150 to 200 calls a day.
That is so
Right.
crazy to me. Wow.
Break that down on a per minute level, per
Yeah.
second level, you're looking at a significant number of calls within like a 5-hour period.
Yeah.
You're balancing, like, I guess, picking up the phone and manually scheduling appointments, while at the same time you're having to service, a mom and a toddler that had just come in for like their teeth cleaning, while at the same time also like dealing with an insurance company that's calling you on a different line to validate whether or not a claim that you filed has been actually processed and if they need any more information. And so I think within like the first week, we were ready to quit.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, because you're just like being pulled in so many different directions, right?
Yeah. And a lot of emphasis was being placed on the phone calls and as the most important part, even though, in my opinion, in-person patience was the most important part.
Yeah.
But phone calls was important to the bottom line, right? And so when Alan's dad's looking at, I guess, his accounting sheets or his P&L, he's trying to figure out the correlation between revenue and phone calls, and it's very simple. It's new patients and existing patient new appointments, right?
Okay.
If you pick up a call and there's a new patient that calls in, or there's an existing patient that wants to book a new appointment, that directly impacts your bottom line.
Yeah.
Or your top line, sorry.
So I got a question. Yeah. You said that they were getting like 100 to 150 calls a day. And is dental in Canada approached the same way as it is in America, where they recommend you go twice a year?
Yeah, they recommend you go twice a year. Yeah.
Okay. So knowing that you literally are only going to do this twice a year as an individual, how many people do dentists see on average per year?
Oh, a lot. The average clinic probably sees like 2,500 patients in like a relatively populated city. In a metropolitan city like New York, Toronto, it can be upwards of 5,000 patients. Wow. But also I think there's a different nuance to this where you're thinking of general dentistry, where it's just, you go in for your like teeth cleaning twice a year and your checkups. But there's so many different types of dentistries, right? There's periodontics, endodontics, etc. Yeah. There's people whose teeth are falling out, they need to be replaced, root canals, crowns, ortho. So like there's a full spectrum, and not every clinic necessarily caters to only one thing. There's clinics that are specialized, there's clinics that are multi-specialty, so they offer 3 or 4 different specialties. And we were in that situation, hilariously, where one of Alan's parents' clinics is a multi-specialty practice. So not a lot of people get to see the kind of problems you would see in a multi-specialty practice often, because they're just not that popular and there's not that many of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for sure. And also hearing you talk about all this, it like makes me incredibly grateful that I am one of those people that just has to go in for a twice a year checkup. Because I feel like I always tell my hygienist I have such a love-hate relationship with being there, because I love when I leave and I love getting like the stamp of approval and, hey kid, you're doing a good job. Keep up with the flossing. But while the cleaning is happening, I'm like, oh, I hate this so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We got to be grateful to have good teeth.
So I had no idea that you guys actually worked there. So you did know that this was an issue and that it was kind of like always floating around in the background, but it just hadn't been something you had decided to pursue.
Yeah, because Alan's dad in particular is a big stickler on like how many calls am I missing?
Mm-hmm.
And so we always knew that like we were missing 30 to 50% of calls on a weekly basis, right? And it was being hammered into us like, hey guys, you need to reduce this down to like 10%, right? Because I'm missing new patients because you're not picking up the phones. So I guess that was like the catalyst to us figuring out that this was actually a pretty massive issue across the industry. It's just something that we didn't necessarily think about focusing on at the time.
Okay. So then there was obviously some moment where you guys decided, okay, we need to make a change and we should just move forward with this other idea that we've had.
Yeah. Did you have Nate as one of your mentors in Techstars?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Nate
Yeah.
was our lead mentor in Techstars.
Oh, right on.
Awesome
Okay.
guy.
Great guy. Yeah. I tried to convince him to come and tell his story on this podcast, and he was like, I don't do social stuff. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, Nate does not do social stuff.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that very early on we learned from Nate was that it wasn't important to have an idea as a startup founder. It was more important to focus on, or it wasn't important to focus on the idea. It was more important to focus on the process of validating the idea.
Okay.
So
Great
you're not
advice.
building a
Yep.
machine. Yeah, you're not building a machine for a specific problem you think there exists in the industry. You're building a machine around validating whether that problem is even relevant or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that machine needs to be adaptable in the sense that if you find a problem and you validate that it doesn't exist, that machine needs to allow you to repeat that so you do find a problem that eventually that you end up validating.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was the catalyst moment for us because up until then we were deluding ourselves that the problem we were solving is real.
Okay.
So we decided, you know what, let's put on pause the entire platform and instead focus on whether or not this problem exists.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as jobs to be done was a big part of that, right?
Yeah.
The mom test. So just talk to your customers and get an idea of like how are they solving what you think is a pain point today.
Yep.
And when we started talking to people in the nightlife industry, we started speaking to, you know, club owners, hospitality group owners, and it became very clear to us that they were not currently solving this problem that we thought existed with anything. And so when you try to have that kind of conversation, there's no substance to it because, you know, if they're not solving this problem, then it probably doesn't exist in their minds. So clearly it's not something that is even worth talking about. So that we had a few conversations like that, I think like 5 or 6, when we figured out like, hey, this thing isn't real. And so then Nate's like, hey, go find a different problem. And then one of our advisors, Adil, who founded a company called Swift, he sort of gave us the idea of like looking into our backgrounds and finding something that, you know, exists within our own life experiences. And that's when Alan and I looked at each other like, man, we've got a problem to solve right in front of us.
Oh my gosh. So that's so cool. So then Rondah AI was born.
Yes.
All right. So tell a little bit about what Rondah AI is so people listening now understand this connection in this dental conversation we've been having.
Yeah. So like I said, 30 to 50% of calls are being missed. I think there's a broader issue here, which is around staffing.
Mm-hmm.
The dental industry in general just has a massive staffing shortage.
Okay.
And they have very high turnovers, especially in administrative roles.
Dang.
So
okay.
if you think about the average clinic, they probably, especially in a metropolitan city, they probably need upwards of 6, 7 receptionists and even a call center.
Dang.
But instead, they're staffed with maybe 1, 2, 3 receptionists that are having to simultaneously juggle immense amounts of paperwork, large volumes of calls, and at the same time service in-person patients, right?
Yeah.
They're generally overworked and underpaid. That's the problem we're solving. And we started to tackle that problem with phone calls because we know that that's the most stressful part of the job. Having the phone ring constantly while you're servicing in-person patients is a problem I faced and Alan faced. And then on top of that, we know that through Alan's dad sort of hammering it into us that missing phone calls is directly impacting the top line of the business. And at the same time, we knew that AI was becoming advanced and voice AI was sort of in its infancy at the time, but it was a very interesting space to explore. So the intersection of all those different things sort of gave us the confidence that we needed to solve the problem that way. So Rondah is an AI receptionist that answers the phones, schedules appointments, reschedules appointments, you know, deals with patient questions, and then triages calls to the right person if someone else needs to take over.
I mean, you know, obviously I'm a fan. I invested in your company. I think that what you guys are building is so cool. And I think it's just so neat that she can handle so many calls at one time, can speak how many languages?
I think it's upwards of 50.
That's so crazy. AI
yeah,
is
basically
just
every spoken
insane.
language today.
Really? That is
Yeah.
so cool. So, as you've been implementing all of this in these different dental offices, what has the feedback been from the receptionists that are working?
It's funny because everyone thinks that the receptionist would hate it because they think it's threatening their job.
I would think that they would
Uh,
love it.
Yeah. So see, you're I think an outlier in that. The
Yeah.
receptionists actually do love it. They're our biggest advocates, they're our biggest champions. I think they're the ones that benefit the most from it. And we tailored the platform around that. We call it an AI receptionist. Really, what it should be called is like an AI front desk co-pilot, if we were being very specific. But AI receptionist just, explains this a little bit better. But yeah, they love it. I mean, at the end of the day, we're saving receptionists hours of answering phones and being overworked. And at the same time, we're able to capture every single new patient and every single appointment, so
Hmm.
that, that directly has a massive impact on the business's ability to generate new revenue.
I'll be interested to see over time how it helps with receptionist or that role of administrative assistant, whatever they're called. I'll be interested to see how it impacts the turnover because my initial assumption would be that now these people that are in those roles, they're not going to be as exhausted. They're going to be able to prove their value in so many different ways and maybe be even more creative and innovative on solving problems with insurance companies or solving problems with patient, like in-person patient dynamics, whereas like before they were just like so wiped out and so beat up and probably getting the same type of feedback that you guys were from their dentist or their orthodontist being like, hey, we're missing X amount of calls, we got to do better on that. And they're sitting there probably thinking to themselves, how on earth am I going to be able to do
Yeah.
that? So that
No,
would be
that
some
I
cool
couldn't have put it
data.
better.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, how exciting. So, what has been your like biggest unexpected like moment as you've been going on this journey as entrepreneurs and making the pivot and like, doing what you're doing now? What has been something that like you didn't expect that's been like either cool or like extremely frustrating as you've been out?
I think when you start a business as a person that has the cushion of like home, so you start your first business in university, you've got other things to juggle with it, or you've got your first job that you're juggling with your business. You're never taking either completely seriously, and so you don't realize the tangible impact that running a business has on your personal life. And so when you go all in on something like this, and it takes up 18 hours of your day, and on top of that you're getting traction, which means you have more and more responsibility. It's one thing for you to say you're an entrepreneur, and you're building something like Alibi, like we were, where there's no customers, no one who's really using it, no responsibility around those people. It's a different story. But when you've got hundreds of dental clinics that rely on you to answer their phones every single day, when you've got patients that rely on you to schedule appointments so that they get their dental care met, especially people who are, experiencing dental emergencies. And then on top of that, you got employees that have kids. So there's families relying on you to put food on the table. And then on top of that, there's, investors that have put a lot of money into your company, or a little bit of money into your company in your case. Either way, it's a lot of responsibility, right? And I did not realize how much of an impact that would have on, I guess, my own ability to manage my life.
Interesting. So, what have you been doing to give yourself some grace and ability to take care of yourself on this adventure?
I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, how do you make sure that you live up to that responsibility, right? And
Okay.
I think you need to remove yourself from that equation. I
Hmm.
think obviously basic self-care, like getting a good night's sleep, going to the gym, like eating right. Those are like three things that you can index on to make sure that you are at the very least baseline taking care of yourself.
Hmm.
But outside of that, I think the more important question is, what are you doing to make sure that you don't let down your employees who are relying on you to put food on the table? That you ensure the most uptime for your customers and your patients that are relying on you for their business and their livelihoods. I think that's the more important question, and I think our fundraise had a part to do with that, right? To make sure we have the resources to be able to handle that kind of volume. And I think being very methodical about how do you allocate capital and how do you allocate resources and how do you plan your product roadmap around ensuring that this responsibility is being met at all times. I think
Hmm.
that's the more important thing
No, I mean, I think
than
that's
taking care of yourself, etc.
Oh, well, I definitely think that's super important. I'm just of the camp where that if I'm not taking care of myself, it's harder for me to be my best for other people. So that is why I was asking you, because like the last thing that you would want to do, I mean, that was a lot of responsibility that you listed off. And I know that
Yeah,
you're doing it and doing it well and smartly, but you also need to take care of yourself because you don't want to end up burnt out and then having something suffer as a result. So that is kind of where my question was
got
heading towards. But I certainly appreciate the redirect because you know what I mean? It is. And I think that that's something that's so interesting. I mean, I've had this conversation before with like C-suite people at massive, tech companies, right? Where they're running something that is, 70, 80 billion dollars, P&L, and their organizations are thousands and thousands of people deep. And yeah, they're not directly managing all of those, but if they're like, hey, this is like my portion of the business, and there's like of the 100,000 employees in this company, 50,000 of them like technically roll up under me. That's like a lot of weight to carry when you are thinking about it from the same perspectives that you were thinking about it, thinking about how, all these people have families and they're putting food on the table and they're taking care of their kids and they're doing all these things, and you're assuming a level of responsibility for people's livelihoods. So
yeah.
it's definitely a different perspective than a lot of people will ever have, because if they're just, and I'm not saying just to anybody working just a normal ish 9 to 5 job, but when you do say, hey, I'm going to start something, I'm going to build something, you're looking at the business from a different lens.
Yeah, I think you've just like created a different beast that you didn't anticipate ever, being made,
Mm-hmm.
or the implications that would have on like outside of your own life. So yeah, I think that was the most surprising. Bringing it back to your original question, what was the most
Yeah,
surprising thing about doing this? That I think is was the most surprising thing about this journey.
that's great. So as you guys have grown, I noticed, I think it was just yesterday that you put out a rec for some more engineering type folks. So
Mhm.
that's super exciting to know that you are at a point where you need that help. How have you guys managed the scaling of the company?
I think it was an iterative process. We weren't managing it well to start with. A lot of like when you're a very early stage startup is just doing a lot of manual stuff in the back end to make it seem like things are being automated and to make it seem like to your at least to your customers that things are going well. But you're still being scrappy in the back end to make things work. And I think that's part of like the 0 to 1, which is like get product or early signs of product market fit, not just product market fit, and then deliver something to your customers that shows you how they would be using a product like this that would eventually become like what your product is going to be, if that makes sense. So I think managing that part was easy because you're doing a couple clinics, you're being scrappy. Going the 1 to 100 is a phase we're currently at, which is like how do we scale this out from just a couple practices to hundreds? And that part has been, smart engineering and product roadmap sort of planning where we just tackle the lowest hanging fruit, the thing that'll be the fastest to make, but will have the highest impact. And then saving everything else is kind of gravy, and you just got to put it to the side until those things are solved. I think if you can do that, you can sort of start to build scalability around it. I think we've hit like I think 50% of like our goal of how we want to scale, and the rest, the last like 10% is the hardest part. And we're prepping for that by hiring engineers right now. So we make sure that we have the resources necessary to do it. But like my vision here is that right now it takes hours, days, maybe sometimes weeks to get a clinic live. We want to take that time down to as close to 0 minutes as possible so that any dental practice can onboard us within a matter of minutes. Because that's the dream, right? You want to be able to democratize this so any practice can have a receptionist, whether or not they can afford it. And then you also want to be able to do it so that enterprises like these DSOs, which are private equity backed groups, can scale this product across hundreds of different practices.
Yeah, I like that. That's exciting. I have two questions. One's a more like business focused and one's more about you. So I'm gonna ask the business one first, since we were just talking about that. This is something I'm curious about as someone who does like is an adopter of like newer technologies. Like, I mean, some of the tech that I use for my podcast in particular. What is your guys' feedback loop as far as like from your customers when they're asking for new features? What does that process look like, and how do you decide what makes the most sense to implement?
That's actually a great question because we were just talking about this earlier, the three founders. A lot of the stuff your customers ask for might not necessarily be things you should you should be focused on building right now. And I think the way you can validate that is by just probing into why they've asked you to build it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think What you need to do is figure out the why and then build a solution around that why rather than get their idea for the solution and build that, because
Hmm.
there's this like gap there that you need to figure out why that what that gap is and why it exists. And
Hmm.
it's usually because they're just not thinking about it in a problem solving mindset, at least when it comes to tech solutions, right? They're thinking of it as, hey, I'm a business owner, I'm a dentist, like how would I solve this problem?
Right.
So I think that's it. So just ask them why. For example, like one of our customers wanted the ability to take a look at like an appointment's details in like our front facing panel, which is not very interesting, but essentially like we asked them why, and it turns out that they were actually looking at every single call, whether or not an appointment got scheduled, even though we
Oh,
show if an appointment got scheduled, but that's
uh-huh.
because they're just making sure that Rhonda's doing her job properly and that, if patients didn't say something that we didn't catch.
Oh,
So
uh-huh.
once we figured out that like, hey, you're just scared that like there's calls that you might be missing out on that you don't have context on, let's just, show a quick summary on the dashboard. That's better than, us having to build this whole new dashboard so that you can find a way of like navigating through calls that like we might have missed something on.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's a really shitty example to be honest, but hopefully that makes sense.
So are each of the calls recorded?
Every single call is recorded. Yeah.
Okay, so they can actually go back and listen, and if they were curious if something was missed in the notes or in the booking.
Oh no, not only can every call you can go back and listen to it, everyone does. Like the receptionists say to us straight up that they listen to Rhonda's voice more than they do anyone else's voice throughout
Oh
the
my
day.
gosh, how funny.
Because what they're really doing is instead of answering phones now, they're just listening at the end of their day. Maybe they spend like an hour listening through a bunch of calls to make sure everything went okay.
Interesting. And have you had any big errors in any of that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Early days,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were not the greatest platform. I mean, it's been a long journey to sort of get us to like some state of reliability. Um, I think we've gotten to a point now where we're not focused on, how do we bring the reliability up as much,
Hmm.
because we know that 99.9% of calls are going well.
Hmm.
So we're just focused on the scale part now. But yeah, back in the day, like you would literally find all three of us. If we weren't working on something, we were listening to calls to make sure that things are
Yeah.
going okay. And then
Yeah.
things were obviously not going okay most of the time. So we'd go back and fix it immediately.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I'm wondering, you and I had a conversation a few weeks ago about our moms and their understanding of what you guys are actually doing. And so it made me think a little bit more about that. And I wondered, like, have you guys gone and pitched to any dentist? Because, like, the dentist that I've had, I mean, he was like my dad's age and he just recently retired. And so
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like you guys going and talking to dentists like him that have been doing it forever and then they hit their 70s and they're like, okay, I'm finally going to hang it up and pass it on to someone younger. And, have you had conversations with people where they're just like, wait, what? Like AI?
Yeah, no, this happens every day. We don't pitch to dentists because we go
Okay,
after the DSOs, right?
got
So
it.
like we're exclusively 100% focused on, getting these enterprise groups that have hundreds of practices. So we're not going and selling on a per practice level, and the person we're selling to is not the dentist. It's usually like the COO or the chief marketing officer of the DSO itself. But Alan does when he's onboarding the clinics, right? Because it's either like the dentist that's on that call or it's usually the office manager and the receptionist. And these people, they're just not like necessarily tech savvy. They're really smart people. It's just they're
Sure.
not
Yeah, yeah.
very they're not in the ecosystem as much as we are. And that's just a product of like, their lives, right? They work completely different roles. So yeah, you see that a lot within like office managers and receptionists and like the dental clinic owners when we're onboarding them just being very confused about how all this stuff works. But you'd be surprised how quick they pick up on the subtle nuances of a platform like this.
No, that's amazing. I mean, because you got to think too, like with a lot of people's, experience, right, with anything that's automated is like that frustration where you're like yelling receptionist or representative into the phone and just being an absolute lunatic because you're trying to talk to somebody about what it is
Yeah.
that you want to solve. So, yeah, I mean, I'm blown away on a consistent basis by how good different AI has gone. I even asked, I was in a chat with Substack actually, and I literally asked the chat person or that after we finished up, I was like, "Are you AI or are you real?" And they were like, "It was like, no, I'm AI." And I was like, "This was amazing! Like, I am so
Yeah.
impressed with their chat support because it was literally like talking to a human being." a very
Yeah, no, it's
smart
crazy.
human being. Yeah.
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 I think that's the important thing, right? It's not just that you're talking to, I think you're, a lot of people think that patients or like consumers are indexing on like what the most human-like experience of chatting with AI is. I
Hmm.
actually don't think that's what they're indexing on. You could have like an AI bot that sounds, very robotic, that doesn't have very human-like sentence structures.
Hmm.
But if they solve the problem faster than a human could for you, that's really what the person is indexing on. Is like how quickly
Yeah,
can you understand what problem I'm having and how quickly can you solve my problem
exactly.
for me?
Exactly. No, I mean, I use Claude for my AI assistant. And I mean, the other night I uploaded 6 PDFs of transcripts of podcasts and I had specific instructions of what it is that I wanted. And I
Yeah.
even said, this may take a while. That's totally okay. It was like 60 seconds.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
I was like,
Um,
holy shit.
yeah, Claude is an unreal product.
Yeah. And it was even interesting too because okay, here's a question for you. Do you view Claude as a he or a she?
It,
Okay,
yeah,
I think Claude, the name Claude, I like think of like a French guy. So
yeah,
I'm just like, oh, like Claude's a guy. And then one of my girlfriends, I was saying to her, I was like, oh yeah, I started using Claude instead of Chat GPT. And she's like, oh, ooh, do you like her? And I was like, wait, what? So now I'm like asking everybody that uses Claude, I'm like, oh, in your mind, is Claude masculine or feminine?
yeah.
So that's funny.
It's funny because I think of the application layer product as like he or she. So things
Mm-hmm.
like Lindy.ai or
Oh,
like
uh-huh.
Polly.ai or like us. Whereas like the actual underlying models like ChatGPT, Claude, etc., I think of it as an it, but I think it's because like we're in the industry and we know kind of like the way the framework works. And so when you're on an application layer, you're assigning an identity to this thing. Whereas like when you're doing it on the infra layer, you're like, cool, it's just a model. It's just like a brain, a piece of the thing. So yeah.
How did you guys come up with the name Rhonda?
Alan's dad's the longest time receptionist. Her name is Rhonda. She's worked for him
No
for like 15
way.
years. Yeah.
Oh my
Have I told you this story?
gosh. No.
Oh, that's funny.
No.
Yeah,
That
no. So
is,
we actually part of the process of us working at his parents' clinics was like, when we got frustrated with how difficult like being a receptionist was, we looked at Rhonda, who's like, killing it, answering all the calls, like, helping patients with like a smile on her face, and we're like, hey, Rhonda, like, how do you do this job? Like,
yeah.
and you're absolutely crushing it, and you've done this for like 15 years. So so kind of gave us a rundown on what it looks like to be a good dental receptionist and like how much, domain expertise and knowledge and institutional knowledge she's gained over the last 15 years of working as that role. And we were like, holy shit, let's just take what she said to us and translate that into software.
Oh my
And we have ourselves
gosh.
a product.
That is so cool. I love that. And is she just like so touched by this?
Yeah, I think she likes it. I haven't had actually much conversation with her around this. Alan
Uh-huh.
has, but his dad did warn us that she is a shark, so she might come after us for like using her name at some point. But I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
he's like half joking.
Oh my God. I love it. That's hilarious. That is so cute. How cool. Well, this has been so much fun. I feel like I've learned so much more, even more than I already did. And now I'm even more impressed than I already was. So thanks for sharing everything with me.
No, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if anybody is listening from the DSO world, how can they come and find you?
Oh, I mean, LinkedIn is the place I'm at, 18, 20 hours a day. Otherwise, email.
Awesome.
But I'm pretty good on LinkedIn, so they can reach out to me there.
Awesome. And all of Burhan's information will be in the show notes. And if you just are curious at all about their product, you should definitely go check out their website and place a phone call because she's pretty wickedly smart. So
I appreciate that.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And everybody, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you have not already subscribed or liked or all of the good things on the Apple platform, please do so. It does really help out. And we will talk to you next week. Bye.